So I don't want to hear like the phony, it's just a smaller government. It's not a smaller government when you're consolidating power under your big daddy Trump. Stop trying to fix your daddy issues with your policy decisions when it comes to the federal government. Stop doing that. Work out your own crap, then come back and try to actually help the American public. What's up, everybody? It's your favorite gay-looking straight guy, Hunter Avalone here, back with another video. Now today I figured we would take a break from having our own mental breakdowns to instead examine the Republicans breaking down. I'm not kidding. They are going insane. With the election year approaching rapidly, the Republicans are making no effort whatsoever to try and hide just how deranged they really are. And don't get me wrong, I think the Democrats and Joe Biden, of course, have plenty of issues there also. But I mean, compared to the insanity that is this Republican herpes-infested conglomeration, I don't know, the Democrats just... they're kind of boring, maybe a little sleepy, but hey, at least they're not gonna like drive the country off a bridge. So there have been two major stories recently that came to my attention. The first one being Republican senator blocks bill to codify Americans' right to contraception. We've definitely talked extensively on this channel about abortion, but more specifically, this kind of thing really gets on my nerves because Republicans LARP a ton about being against abortion. They talk a really big game about how abortion is so bad, it's a violation against God, even though God actually did an abortion in the Old Testament, but whatever. They constantly go on this big LARP fest about how bad abortion is, and then they're against contraceptives. Every available statistic that we have demonstrates that access to contraception reduces abortion rates because the main reason people get abortion, of course, is unplanned pregnancy. And when you're using contraception, you're far less likely to experience an unplanned pregnancy. It's really that simple. So once again, we have this issue where the Republicans complain about the problem, then won't do anything to solve the problem. In fact, they make the problem worse, then they go right back to complaining about the original problem. Senator Edward Markey and Senator Patty Murray, chair of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, sought unanimous consent to pass the Right to Contraception Act to protect every American's fundamental right to use birth control. But Republican Senator Johnny Ernst, what kind of a name is Johnny? Is that Joni? Johnny? He can't even say his own name right, Joni. Republican Senator Joni Boy blocked the common sense legislation, despite nearly the entire House Republican conference voting against the bill. I don't understand this. Like, I can get the abortion argument, especially being a former conservative myself. I can understand the arguments about like, that's life, or that's a human, or even if it's not a human, it could be a human. Like, I can get that. At least I can wrap my mind around that. This is just like, why? It's like that meme where it's like, I consent, and then the Republican walks in and he's like, I don't consent. You're not using a condom now, are you? It's creepy. Just last week, 195 House Republicans voted against the Right to Contraception Act. And now they have blocked action in the Senate as well. The evidence of where Republicans actually stand on birth control is overwhelming. They aren't standing for women, they aren't standing for families, they aren't standing for a right nearly all Americans support, they are simply standing in the way. Which is true. And this is something you should think about also as the election is approaching. What are the Republican policies? What are their actual goals and policies? Most of the time, and we're going to talk about some of their goals here soon, but most of the time, Republicans are preoccupied with just standing in the way of the Democrats. The Democrats are trying to pass this policy. They're trying to do stuff. Republicans don't really do anything. They just kind of like sit there and then just get in the way. They're all reactive. Nothing is ever proactive with them. It's all just wait for the Democrats to do or say something, and then our whole shtick is that we're just against that thing. Today, Republicans showed the American people where they stand. No abortions and no birth control to prevent the need for one. The right-wing extremists in the United States Senate and on the Supreme Court are way out of touch with the vast majority of the American people, and yet they still want to tell them what to do with their bodies and their lives. So this is really concerning, okay? This should concern everybody here. The Republicans are not hiding their desire to try and restrict your freedoms as much as they possibly can. And it's funny too, because these are the patriots who LARP all the time about how much they love freedom and how America's the land of the free. It's like, it's the land of the free unless you want to use a condom, okay? No, you're not free anymore, all right? The guy overseas who may have died for American oil interests, he didn't die for you to use a condom, bitch, okay? Take that shit off. That's pretty much what they're saying without saying it. And it's embarrassing and it's pathetic. And it also makes me think how, yeah, Joe Biden is annoying. The guy is old. He seems like he's falling apart. He doesn't really remember where he is or even who he is, it seems. But like, at least he doesn't forget about your right to contraception. At least he can remember that much. So while it is true that the Republicans primarily spend their time preoccupied with just resisting whatever the Democrats are doing, the Republicans do sometimes introduce a semblance of a plan or a policy. The main problem with that is with the Democrats, you're like, oh, this is a policy. Maybe there's a problem there. I don't know about that, but at least I can kind of see this or like why they're coming from this angle. With the Republicans, it's like, oh, they have a policy? Oh, good. Oh, it's just fascism. I'm being hyperbolic, but I'm not really kidding as much as I'd like to be. So when we talk about some of the plans the Republicans have, this is where the next demonstration of their unhinged behavior comes into play. So Republicans are currently working on a new strategy. It's a plan called Project 2025. And what this aims to do is give far more power to the executive branch of the government, and it aims to put people throughout the government that are incredibly loyal to Donald Trump, which is another very concerning and fascistic thing. To prioritize loyalty over all else. To be against the idea of being held accountable, you only value loyalty. This kind of thinking is dangerous, especially when it's your job to be running the government. Republicans are pushing for a plan that could dramatically reshape America's balance of power by putting virtually every part of the federal government under the control of Donald Trump or any president from either party, for that matter. Something they should consider. If a Republican wins this time, and they're like, oh, yay, let's give Donald Trump dictatorial power. What happens when he loses next time? What happens when he can't run again? What happens when a Democrat runs? Led by the right-leaning think tank, the Heritage Foundation, and former Trump officials, Project 2025 is aimed at creating a government in waiting for the next Republican presidential administration, and it would centralize power in the White House by putting independent agencies like the Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Trade Commission under direct presidential control. And while this blueprint absolutely resonates with Donald Trump's own campaign plans, some of his GOP rivals, like Ron DeSantis, also are supporting and championing this Project 2025 thing. This is not just Donald Trump being crazy here. The Republicans are lockstep in schizophrenia. Some public policy experts are already sounding the alarm about what it would mean if the plan is carried out. So Project 2025 was first proposed in April, and it is a $22 million presidential transition agenda that would pave the way for a conservative administration by preparing policies, personnel lists, and transition plans. But what's even more concerning about this project, even more so than consolidating some of these powers under just the executive branch of the government, this isn't even that new. Project 2025 isn't even that different from a similar playbook that was made by the Heritage Foundation 50 years ago for Ronald Reagan. And in fact, it was that blueprint which became incredibly influential throughout Reagan's administration. And it says here that nearly 2/3 of the blueprint's 2,000 recommendations were used by the Reagan administration, and this playbook also shaped Reagan's domestic and foreign policy. We already know how Reagan's administration played out. We know we had that pesky little nuisance called Al-Qaeda that happened because of Reagan's terrible foreign policy. We already know that Reagan was a huge supporter of the trickle-down economics, and now 50 years plus of data collection has demonstrated that trickle-down economics does not work. It is not a thing. You're not going to just pay someone at the top more and expect that to trickle down to their workers. That's not going to happen. We've now learned this. We've learned this all the hard way. We know these things don't always work. We know that they don't seem to work more times than they do. But yet they're just right back into it. And that's why I always make the same joke where I say, are Republicans really even that against climate change? Because they're recycling their arguments over and over and over again. 50 years ago, Ronald Reagan, he made Al-Qaeda He demonstrated that one of the core conservative economic tenets are actually just doesn't work. And yet now Republicans are just going right back to that same thing. They're like, you know what we need? We need the same thing that fucked Reagan. That's what we need. You know what completely fucked Reagan and then the entire country from that point on, even more so? We should do that again because it's a lot harder to notice the Republicans' failings when ISIS is a thing. Maybe we should just bring ISIS back. I don't understand how they could look at something that was so obviously a failure of the past and then just want to go right back to that same thing. But then again, cognitive dissonance is one hell of a drug, so what do I know? If Trump returns to the White House in January 2025, Trump will be well prepared to hit the ground running and to carry out his objective. In centralizing powers, the project aims to advance a mission Republicans have long pursued, creating a smaller federal government. I clown on this a lot too. I really am annoyed by the Republicans just, there should be a small government. Why? Because big government bad. Like they never know why. Like the government should be as big as it needs to be to accommodate the people and to do what we want the government to do. If that means expanding the government in certain areas, fine. If that means making it smaller in some areas, fine. But also, this is not really creating a smaller government. You're consolidating the government. And that's really concerning and incredibly fascistic. Trump's campaign and those behind the plan intend to rein in independent agencies, including the Federal Trade Commission and the Federal Communications Commission, and put them under direct presidential control. There's even an idea to strip the Justice Department of its autonomy that was normalized during the Watergate era and make it subject to White House control. This could potentially stifle its abilities to ensure a fair and impartial administration of justice, including of the president himself. The consolidation of power, the prioritization of loyalty, slowly but surely trying to get rid of other powers that hold you accountable. That is the authoritarian fascistic behavior right there. I don't want to be held accountable. I don't like that the Justice Department can hold me accountable, so I think actually they should be under my control, because now they can't hold me accountable anymore. They're also proposing to gut the, quote, administrative state from within by ousting federal workers who they believe are standing in the way of the president's agenda and replacing them with other like-minded officials. This also includes reinstating Schedule F. Some people claim that this is going to make it a lot easier to hire or fire civil service employees, or it could contribute to the Trump administration just arbitrarily firing people because, well, they don't really like them. But according to the person who came up with the idea of Schedule F, according to an interview they did with New York Times, it doesn't sound like that would necessarily destroy all of the protections in place. So there might not be like a legal degradation of that protection per se. However, it's not stopping the Trump administration from still acting outside of this entirely. They say that Schedule F wouldn't destroy the protections in place that shield these workers from unfair practices, and that it expressly forbids hiring or firing based on political loyalty. However, according to Axios, the Trump allies are already pre-screening thousands of potential employees and appointees by political ideology, and they're checking to see would-be candidates are loyal to Trump. And then last but not least, another really bad idea proposed in this Project 2025 is the idea of adding a U.S. citizenship status for every person who partakes in the U.S. Census. This was first proposed by the Trump administration in 2019 before it was later shot down by the Supreme Court for being, quote, implausible and legally inadequate. And then even more so, it's been argued by some critics that by including the citizenship status on the census, you are going to inevitably scare some people from partaking in that census entirely if they are not here legally. So because they don't want to partake in the census, that is going to lead to immigrants being undercounted, meaning that some states, particularly Democratic states, since Democratic states are more accepting of immigrants, Democratic states specifically could then get less representation in Congress and less funding. So it has a roundabout way of not only targeting immigrants and other minority groups that whether you think illegal immigration is good or bad, whether they're here legally or not, immigrants do a net positive for America, for this country, and for the economy. So not only are they singling out a minority group that's benefiting the economy and the country, but they are also in a roundabout way trying to further harm the Democrats and their representation and their ability to receive funding from the federal government. It's incredibly meticulous and analytical, the way that the Republicans intend to go about essentially granting themselves more power. So I don't want to hear like the phony, it's just a smaller government. It's not a smaller government when you're consolidating power under your big daddy Trump. Stop trying to fix your fucking daddy issues with your policy decisions when it comes to the federal government. Stop doing that. Work out your own crap, then come back and try to actually help the American public. And if you still aren't convinced that this absolutely is very fascistic of the Republicans, then maybe I can show you one of my favorite lists, the 14 points of fascism. Because fascism, at least partially, relies on its incoherence, it's incredibly difficult to explain what fascism actually is. However, this list of 14 points of fascism really helps to bring clarity to just how fascistic the Republicans really are. So a big one when we see the Trump administration searching for loyalty is point 4 on the list. Disagreement is treason. The critical spirit makes distinction, and to distinguish is a sign of modernism. In modern culture, the scientific community praises disagreement as a way to improve knowledge. But you'll notice when it comes to the Republicans, they don't like that. You need to agree with Donald Trump and their mission, and if you don't, you're fucked. If you don't, well, maybe they can't legally oust you yet, but they're gonna do everything they can within their own power to make sure that you are lockstep in agreement with them. It's dogmatic. Point 5, fear of difference. The first appeal of a fascist or prematurely fascist movement is an appeal against the intruders. Remember Donald Trump? They're bringing drugs, they're rapists. Donald Trump absolutely played into this. I don't think he necessarily created it, but that mentality was there, and Donald Trump took advantage of that. Point 7, another excellent one when you hear how Republicans talk about election fraud, the obsession with a plot. Thus, at the root of fascist psychology, there is the obsession with a plot, possibly an international one. The followers must feel besieged. You must feel like you've been taken advantage of. And this is exactly how Donald Trump was able to tell and convince his supporters that he was a victim, that they were all being besieged by the evil Democrats, and that's why they had to raid the Capitol. That's why they had to go there on January 6th. That's why they had to try to interfere with the process. That's why they had to try to give Trump more power. And now because of this, we see their obsession with a plot playing out with also their attempt at a solution to this imaginary plot. Now we're gonna oust everyone who doesn't agree with me. If you don't support Donald Trump or the GOP agenda, you're out of here. This is the obsession with a plot. They're just trying to give a solution to that obsession. Of course, that solution is not at all a solution because there is no evil international big plot trying to take down the Republicans or anyone. Another one that I actually see on the list that I think I must have missed earlier is another really common one that Republicans do. The cult of action for action's sake. Remember how I was talking about how Republicans a lot of the times will just resist whatever the Democrats say? Action being beautiful in itself. It must be taken before or without any previous reflection. Thinking is a form of emasculation. And that's why this fascism crap seeps in, and it also ends up enticing a lot of young men who are feeling really lost. Republicans have played into that at least once. I know they've played into point 8. The enemy is both strong and weak. By a continuous shifting of rhetorical focus, the enemies are at the same time too strong and too weak. You hear this a lot. They're just the delusional soy boys. They're the triggered SJWs, the stupid libcucks afraid of everything. But they're also incredibly meticulous and conniving, and they control all the systems, and they control the schools. They're so powerful. But at the same time, they're so weak. They're such a joke. They're stupid soy boys, dude. We see this happen all the time. And unfortunately, this is all too common with the Republicans. Fascism is right-wing ideology at the end of the day. So this Project 2025 thing, it is concerning. It's concerning, but unfortunately, it's not surprising. It's also important to really remember the extent by which the Republicans are breaking down when election year is approaching so quickly. Because like I said, I have my problems with Biden and the Democrats too, but they are nowhere near to this extent. I've definitely heard people say before, like, I hate that I have to pick the lesser of two evils. But in reality, that's what every election is. Every single election is just deciding which one do I hate a little bit less. That's pretty much it, right? So if I hate one guy and I hate the other guy running, but one of those guys that I hate is more likely to be a fascist and has fascistic plans for the government, and the other guy that I hate is just kind of boring and I feel like could be doing more, I'm probably going to choose the latter, because every election comes down to choosing the lesser of two evils. And I think one thing is very clear. If they aren't already, the Republicans are absolutely heading towards being evil.